The transmission came in while I was eating lunch. Not a dramatic lunch. Rehydrated goulash from a foil pouch, sitting on a bench carved into volcanic rock, 41 kilometers below the surface of a planet the galaxy had never once bothered to look at twice. The mess hall smelled like coolant fluid and somebody's burned coffee. Len was arguing with Petra about the Junction 3 repairs again. Old Coop was asleep in the corner with his hard hat over his face. The overhead lights hummed at that particular frequency. They always hummed at this depth, the one that lived somewhere behind your ears. Normal Thursday. Then the radio crackled. Karath 9 Colonial Survey. This is the Galactic Habitability Council Survey vessel Ethon Reach. We are entering your orbital corridor to conduct a standard Class Omega environmental review. Please be advised that preliminary scans indicate this planetary body is thermally hostile, magnetically catastrophic, and fundamentally incompatible with sapient habitation. We expect to file the formal uninhabitable designation within 48 standard hours. Please acknowledge. I looked at my goulash. I looked at the 400 people eating lunch around me. Len had stopped arguing. Petra was looking at the ceiling speaker like it had personally insulted her family. Old Coop was still asleep. I picked up the radio handset. Copy that, Ethon Reach. Can you repeat your coordinates? Just want to confirm you have the right planet. There was a pause. We have the right planet, Colonial Survey. Karath 9. Designation K9 Omega. No registered permanent habitation. No active life signs above the 8-kilometer threshold. Right, I said. What about below it? Another pause, longer this time. I'm sorry. Below the 8-kilometer threshold. Are you reading anything down there? The silence from the ship lasted long enough that Petra started laughing quietly into her coffee. I held up one finger to quiet her. We are reading anomalous thermal signatures, the voice said carefully, and what appears to be structured electromagnetic interference. We assumed equipment malfunction. That's us, I said. Sergeant Engineer Dara Vazik, Karath 9 Core Colony, population 412. We've been here 11 years. Do you want to come down for a look, or should I just send you the brochure? My name is Dara Vazik. I grew up in the Pittsburgh Tunnel Guilds, 3rd generation, which means I was born understanding two things: how rock behaves under pressure, and how to read the face of someone who has just realized the ground beneath them is less solid than they thought. The survey team from the Ethon Reach had that face for their entire visit. There were 3 of them. Coordinator Vess, a tall, thin creature from the Hellion Compact, whose species had evolved in low-gravity orbital habitats, and who moved through our corridors like someone carrying a glass of water on their head. Dr. Quill, a researcher from a species whose name I couldn't pronounce but who had 4 arms and used 2 of them exclusively to take notes. And a young human observer named Neil Garrett, who had been stationed aboard the Ethon Reach as part of some interspecies liaison program, and who looked at me when he first stepped off the elevator pod like I was something that should not biologically exist. You live here, he said. It was not a question. It was more like a man watching a tree walk across a field and quietly reassessing everything he had learned about trees. 11 years, I said. Watch your step. The floor curves here. It's a pressure gradient thing. I gave them the tour. Not because I needed to convince them of anything. Honestly, not even because I wanted to. I gave them the tour because after 11 years you develop a relationship with the thing you built, and there is something deeply satisfying about watching 3 people from the surface world try to process it. The coolant rivers came first. Karath 9's subsurface geology produced temperatures that would cook an unprotected person in minutes. We had not fought that. We had redirected it. The coolant channels ran alongside every main corridor, pulling thermal energy away from habitation zones and feeding it into the conversion columns. The columns were Petra's design originally, Back in year 2, when we had 17 people left who knew anything about thermal engineering. She had been 26. She had drawn the first schematic on the back of a ration packaging with a marker. Those columns now produced more usable energy than most mid-tier star systems. Vess kept stopping to run readings on a device that beeped with increasing distress. Dr. Quill's note-taking arms were moving fast. Neil Garrett was just walking and looking at things with that rearranging the universe expression. The magnetic field instability, Vess said at one point, stopping near a junction where you could feel the low vibration in your chest. It should make electronic systems unreliable. It does, I said. If you fight it, we use it. Use it how? The interference pattern is directional from outside the planet. Anything scanning from orbit sees noise. We tune the noise. Took about 3 years to get it consistent. Vess looked at the ceiling, then at me. You made the planet invisible. We made the planet look like itself, I said. Dead rock, magnetic mess. Nothing worth stopping for, which is, I'll be honest, what most of the galaxy already thought. He didn't have a response to that. We passed through the main corridor junction into the older section. The rock here was darker, rougher. The carvings on the wall came from the early years, when the drill teams used whatever they had to mark passages, track progress, leave notes for the next shift. Over time, those marks had become something else. Names, dates, short notations that meant something only to the people who had written them. Neil was reading them as we walked. I could see him doing it. Vess stopped near the longest section. What is this? Load-bearing history, I said. I kept walking. He followed after a moment, and I did not look back at the wall, and I did not explain, and I did not need to. Some things in the universe carry their own weight without any help from words. The rest of the tour covered the mag-rail system, the deep-pressure habitat rings, the water reclamation network, and the geothermal tap array at the 43-kilometer mark, which Vess refused to approach because the vibration made his sensory organs uncomfortable. That was fine. I had never needed anyone's comfort to operate it. They went back up. 2 days later, the Galactic Habitability Council's formal uninhabitable designation for Kareth 9 came through on the same radio frequency they had first called on. Official. Stamped. Filed in triplicate across 6 galactic databases. I printed it. I walked to the break room. I pinned it to the corkboard next to the lunch rotation schedule, and the note about whoever kept leaving their boots in Corridor 7. Len looked at it, then at me. That's it. That's it, I said. What do we do with it? I picked up my coffee. Nothing, I said. We already did everything. I went back to work. Old Coop woke up eventually. He read the designation notice on the corkboard, grunted once, and went to get more coffee. The planet hummed around us the way it always had. 41 kilometers of rock and heat, and built things pressing down from every direction, steady and familiar as breathing. We had a Junction 3 repair to finish before the next rotation. Len and Petrus started arguing about it again, before I was halfway down the corridor. Normal Thursday. The new engineer arrived on a Tuesday, which I know because Tuesday was soup day in the mess hall, and I was trying to decide if the lentil or the vegetable was the lesser disappointment when the elevator pod opened and out stepped Owen Clark, 23 years old, transfer from a surface-based construction program on Relay Station 4, carrying a bag that was far too large and wearing an expression that was far too small for what he was actually feeling. I could tell immediately. The jaw was set. The eyes were doing too much work. He was performing calm the way someone performs calm when the alternative is sitting down on the floor and not getting up. I had seen that face many times. I had worn it once, 11 years ago, stepping off a different elevator pod into a corridor that smelled like hot rock and fear, and the particular thickness of air that lives below the world. Owen Clark, I said. Yes, Sergeant Engineer Vazek. He straightened, formal, good instincts. You eat yet? No, ma'am. Lentil or vegetable, neither is good. The lentil is less bad. Get a bowl, sit down, eat it. Tour starts in 20 minutes. He blinked, no briefing first. You'll understand the briefing better if you've seen the place, and you'll see the place better if you're not running on empty. Eat. He ate. I watched him look around the mess hall the way everyone looks around the mess hall the first time, processing the carved rock ceiling, the coolant channel running along the east wall behind its heat shield, faintly audible if you knew to listen for it. The 400 people eating soup who looked entirely too comfortable being 41 kilometers underground. They don't seem worried, he said. They've been here a while. Doesn't it bother them, the pressure, the heat? It bothered them at first, I said. Then it became normal. That's how humans work. We normalize things that should be impossible, and then we get annoyed when anyone tells us we can't do them. He stirred his soup. Is that how you ended up here? Something like that. The tour started at the main junction and moved deeper. I had given this tour many times. Different people, same planet, same route. But no two tours were identical because the person next to you determined what needed saying and what didn't. Owen was an engineer. He saw things that civilian transfers missed. At the first coolant junction, he stopped without being told, crouched down, read the pressure gauge, stood back up and said, "That's higher than spec." "Yes," I said. "Shouldn't that be adjusted?" "It should be, according to the original specs. Original specs were written for a different situation. What we found here required a different solution. That channel runs 20% over original spec and has for 9 years. We monitor it every 6 hours. It's never moved." He frowned. Not the frown of someone who disagreed. The frown of someone filing information away and building a new mental model around it. That was a good frown. The engineers who survived down here long-term all had that frown. We moved through the thermal conversion wing. I explained the columns, the draw rate, the output yield. He asked intelligent questions. I answered them. He asked about redundancy systems, and I showed him the 3 layers of failsafe built around each column, then the 4th layer built around the failsafes, then the manual override stations positioned every 100 meters, because there was one category of failure that no automated system could handle better than a human being who understood what was happening. "Why manual override everywhere?" he asked, the same question they all asked. I walked 4 more steps before answering. "Because automation doesn't panic," I said, "and sometimes panic is the only thing that knows the tunnel is about to go." He went quiet after that, thinking good. The deeper sections of the colony were older and showed it. The finish on the rock walls changed as you went back in time. The newest corridors were smooth, precisely cut, lined with thermal shielding and standard cable runs. 10 years back, the cuts got rougher. 8 years back, the shielding got patchwork. 6 years back, the cabling was a story of improvisation that I could read like a book because I had written several of the chapters myself. Owen noticed it. The engineering changes as you go deeper. Earlier sections. Different team, different tools, different situation. What kind of situation? The kind where you solve the problem in front of you with what you have and then move to the next one. I turned left at the junction. Come on. The archive room was not on every tour. I put it on Owen's because he was an engineer and he was going to work here a long time, and he needed to understand the shape of the place before he could really work in it. The archive was a side chamber off the old administration block, cool and dry because of a quirk in the local geology that nobody had planned. The colony's records lived on sealed drives racked along one wall, physical copies of key documents in sealed cases on the other. I showed him the schematics, the original ones from year 0, when there had been a full team and proper equipment, and a plan that lasted approximately 4 months before the planet showed us what we were actually dealing with. Then the year 1 schematics, redrawn, half the original scale, different materials, different methods. Then year 2, 3, 4. Each one a conversation between what we had intended and what the planet required. Owen stood in front of them for a long time. "How many people came originally?" he said. "Check the manifest," I said. "Far drive bottom rack, year 0. He found it, pulled it up. "Read the arrival number." I watched his face as he pulled up the current population register, cross-referenced it, and did the arithmetic that I had done many times in the early years and stopped doing eventually because the number did not change and doing the math again never helped. He did not say anything. I did not make him. Some math you have to sit with before you can speak around it. That was not weakness. That was the only honest response to an honest number. We stood there in the cool, dry archive room for a while. Then the colony's deep signal alarm went off. Not the emergency tone, the orbital detection tone. The one we had tuned to trigger when something above us crossed a specific mass threshold on an approach vector. I had heard that tone twice before in 11 years. Owen looked at the ceiling. "What is that?" I was already moving toward the door. "That's a different kind of problem," I said. The signals room was 2 corridors over. Petra was already there when I arrived, 3 screens lit, hands moving across the console with the particular controlled focus she used when she was concerned but not yet scared. There was a difference. I knew both her faces. This was the concerned one, for now. 6 ships, she said without turning around. Galactic Coalition military configuration. They dropped out of jump about 40 minutes ago and have been running scans since. Standard Coalition bandwidth. "Of course they are," I said. I sat down at the secondary board. "Let them." "They're not seeing us clearly," Petra said. "The barrier is holding. They're reading noise." "They're reading it and they're here anyway," I said, "which means someone told them to look harder." Owen had followed me in. He was standing near the door, reading the situation from the screen data, adjusting again. "The Council," he said, "the designation filing." "Probably," I said. He was learning fast. I looked at the orbital positions, 6 ships, military weight. Coalition markings meant authority, not aggression, at least initially. They were not here to destroy something. They were here to enforce something. There was a difference, and the difference was still navigable, but only just, and only if I was very careful about what I did next. I had spent 11 years building something nobody wanted us to build. I was not planning to hand it over because 6 ships had shown up with paperwork. "Petra," I said. "Yeah." "Is the barrier at full resolution?" 100%. "Good." I picked up the deep signal handset. "Let's have a conversation." The planet hummed. I keyed the transmitter. The conversation began. The coalition commander's name was Harlan Moss. He had a careful voice, the kind of careful that comes from long experience deciding how much authority to use and when. He introduced himself with full title and vessel designation, and then, after a precise pause, asked if he was speaking with the appropriate colonial authority. "Sergeant Engineer Dara Vazik," I said, "Kareth-9 Core Colony." Another pause, briefer. "Sergeant Engineer, I was expecting a colonial administrator." "We have one. She's fixing a thermal seal on level 9. I'm available. What can I do for you, Commander Moss?" The signals room was quiet. Petra had muted the environmental audio so nothing from the colony's background would bleed into the transmission. Owen was at the corner console running passive scan readings. The overhead lights hummed their frequency. Somewhere down the corridor, normal work was continuing because I had not told anyone to stop it, and people who have lived 41 kilometers underground for a long time do not stop working just because ships appear in orbit. Ships in orbit are not their problem. The thermal columns are their problem. The pressure seals are their problem. The lentil soup situation is their problem. The ships are mine. "Sergeant Engineer Vazik," Moss said, The Galactic Coalition has received an escalation request from the Habitability Council regarding Karath-9. The planet carries an active Class Omega uninhabitable designation. Our mandate is to confirm the Council's findings, assess any unauthorized activity within the designated zone, and facilitate the appropriate resolution. Appropriate resolution, I said. What does that mean exactly? It means ensuring that no sapient beings are present in a zone certified as incompatible with habitation, for their own safety. I see, I looked at Petra. She was watching the scan readings. The ships were holding position. No weapons configuration yet. Commander Moss, are your scans currently resolving the planet's surface? A pause. We are encountering significant interference. Yes, you are. That interference is generated by the planet's own magnetic field instability, which we have tuned and shaped over approximately 8 years. You are reading noise because we built the noise, which means anything your council told you about uninhabited, uninhabitable, and undetectable needs to be adjusted. The silence from the fleet lasted longer this time. You are stating, Moss said slowly, that the planetary interference pattern is artificial. I am stating that a naturally occurring interference pattern was understood, studied, and refined into a coherent barrier system by 412 human beings who live and work at an average depth of 38 kilometers below the surface of this planet. Yes. Owen looked up from his console. His expression had stopped being surprised. It had moved past that into something quieter and more settled. He was starting to understand the shape of the place, not just the corridors and the columns, the whole thing. Sergeant Engineer, Moss said, and his voice had shifted. The careful authority was still there, but something underneath it had moved. How long has your colony been operational? 11 years. The silence this time was different, heavier. The Council's records show no registered habitation for Karath-9, he said. The Council's records are accurate, I said. We are not registered. Registration requires an application. Applications require a habitability assessment. Assessments require that somebody look at the planet in question. Nobody looked at Karath-9 for the first 11 years we were here. You are actually the first coalition vessel to enter this system. You operated for 11 years without any Galactic Authority contact. We operated for 11 years without any Galactic Authority contact, I confirmed. We were very busy. Another silence. I could hear very faintly other voices on his end. A brief conference happening somewhere on his ship. That was fine. Let them confer. I had time. The barrier was holding. The colony was working. The lentil soup was probably gone by now, and I was going to be annoyed about that later. Sergeant Engineer Vazik, Moss said, returning to the channel with a tone that was slightly less certain than it had been. I have a mandate. I need to confirm that no persons are present in the designated zone and facilitate their safe relocation if necessary. I understand your mandate, I said. I have a counterfiling. A counterfiling. Galactic Resource Code 7, Article 14, Permanent Operational Settlement Clause. It was written for long-term mining operations, but the language is broad. Any sapient group that has established continuous permanent habitation on a designated body for more than 7 standard years, demonstrates active resource extraction and processing, and maintains a self-sustaining population, may file for reclassification review rather than be subject to immediate eviction. We have been here 11 years. We extract and process thermal energy. We have 412 people. I filed the paperwork 6 years ago. The silence from the fleet was the longest yet. You filed 6 years ago, Moss said very carefully. I filed 6 years ago. The acknowledgement came back as undeliverable because we were not in any communication registry. The filing is time-stamped and stored. I can transmit the documentation to your ship directly. You have been sitting on a legal counterfiling for 6 years. I have been sitting on it waiting for this exact conversation, I said. Yes. On the other side of the room, Petra put her face in her hands, not from distress, from the effort of not laughing out loud. Owen had stopped pretending to work at his console. He was just sitting there with his elbows on his knees, watching me, listening to the shape of the thing he had just arrived into. Moss was quiet for a long moment. Then, how many people did you say are in the colony? 412, I said. And how many arrived originally? I had known that question was coming. It always came eventually. I gave him the arrival number, the year 0 number, the one from the manifest in the archive room that Owen had stood in front of and not spoken about. The difference between that number and 412 sat on the channel between us like weather. Moss did not speak for almost 30 seconds. I see, he said quietly. Yes, I said. I need to contact my superiors, he said. I'm requesting a hold period before any further action. Granted, I said, I'll be here. I set down the handset. The signals room was quiet except for the hum of the lights and the faint sound of the coolant moving through the channel 3 corridors away, and the deep, constant, pressure-borne vibration of everything around us. Petra looked at me. How long have you had that paperwork ready? 6 years, I said. You could have filed it when the council showed up. I could have. Why didn't you? I stood up. My back hurt. It always hurt after long shifts at the board. 41 kilometers of pressure did not care how tough you thought you were. Because they came to look, I said, not to listen. There was no point filing to people who hadn't decided yet whether we existed. I looked at the orbital position display. 6 ships, holding, not moving. Waiting like me. Moss will pass this up, I said. Someone bigger is getting woken up. We should figure out what we want to say when they get here. Owen cleared his throat. What do we want to say? I thought about that. The colony hummed around us. The thermal columns ran their steady conversion cycle. The coolant channels moved their constant flow. Somewhere on level 9, the colonial administrator was fixing a thermal seal, and somewhere in the mess hall, the soup situation had reached whatever conclusion it was going to reach. And somewhere in the old section, the names on the rock walls were just names on rock walls, and the weight of all of it pressed down from every direction the way it always had. I don't know yet, I said. Give me until tomorrow. I went to find whatever was left of the soup. The Arbiter arrived 9 days after Commander Moss called his superiors. In those 9 days, Moss kept his fleet in orbit and kept his word about the hold period, and I kept the barrier running and the colony working, and did not sleep more than 4 hours at a stretch, because the kind of waiting that precedes an arbitration is a particular type of waiting that does not let you rest properly. Owen fixed the Junction 3 problem that Len and Petra had been arguing about for 2 weeks. Our colonial administrator, a quiet, precise woman named Carol Dent, came up from level 9 with grease on her jacket and spent 3 days going through every legal document we had ever produced, cross-referencing them against Galactic code archives, and building a case architecture that she presented to me over dinner on day 6 in the form of a 17-page document and the words, "I think we can win this." I read the document. I know we can win this, I said. The question is what winning actually looks like. She studied me. Carol had been with the colony since year 3. She had the same quality that all the long-term people had, a kind of settled density to her presence, like a person who had been compressed by the same pressures as the rock around them and come out harder and more useful. What do you want it to look like? She said. I didn't answer. That was the question I had been avoiding for 9 days. The Arbiter was a Veth. I knew the species by description. Ancient, neutral, bone-deep old in a way that made most galactic civilizations look like they were still figuring out fire. The Veth served as high-tier arbiters in disputes that exceeded the Coalition's internal resolution capacity. The fact that one had been dispatched meant that someone in the Galactic High Seat had looked at our situation and decided it was bigger than a standard eviction proceeding. That was either very good or very complicated, possibly both. The Arbiter arrived via a solo transit vessel that docked with Moss's flagship. The request to meet came through Moss's channel, relayed down to us. The Arbiter would descend to the colony level if we could guarantee environmental accommodation. I confirmed we could. I had already converted one of the larger pressure-adapted conference chambers for exactly this purpose, with ceiling height to spare, because I had looked up Veth dimensions. 6 meters tall. I had adjusted the ceiling to 7.5, because if you are going to do something, you should do it properly. The Arbiter's name was something in the Veth frequency range that our vocal equipment could not reproduce, so by mutual agreement it was referenced in all documentation as Arbiter 7, which it accepted without comment. It arrived in the conference chamber and filled the space the way a tree fills a clearing, not by threatening the space, but by simply being more present in it than anything else. I was standing at the far end of the table. I am not a small person. I am built the way tunnel workers tend to be built, compact and load-bearing. I had faced a lot of things in 11 years that required me to be the steadiest person in the room. I was the steadiest person in the room. Arbiter 7's visual organs oriented toward me. The chamber vibrated softly when it spoke, the walls themselves carrying the frequency translation through the basalt, which I had engineered specifically for this meeting. Sergeant Engineer Dara Vazik, it said. The translation came out in a low, resonant tone that you felt in your chest slightly before you heard it in your ears. Arbiter 7, I said, welcome to Karath 9, can I get you anything? A pause that I was fairly certain was the Veth equivalent of recalibrating expectations. I require nothing, it said. I am here to assess. Then let's start. It presented the Coalition's formal position, which took 12 minutes and covered the habitability designation, the unauthorized occupancy, the resource exploitation without license, and the planetary modification carried out without galactic environmental review. It was thorough and accurate, and did not contain a single piece of information I had not already known was coming. I presented Carol's case architecture in response. It took 8 minutes because Carol had written it tight. Arbiter 7 was quiet for a moment after I finished. You have been thorough, it said. We had 6 years to prepare, I said. Your legal position is defensible, it said. The resource code filing is legitimate. The continuous habitation threshold has been exceeded. These are facts. Yes. However, it said, and I waited because there is always a however, my mandate extends beyond the legal question. I'm here to assess the situation's broader implications. What has been done to this planet, the modifications to its geological systems, the electromagnetic barrier, the thermal extraction network, is unprecedented. No galactic body has evaluated the long-term effects. No environmental impact review has been conducted. With respect, I said, no galactic body evaluated it because no galactic body knew about it, which is also my point. Arbiter 7's visual organs moved in a way that the translation system did not have a framework for, so I just waited. I would like to see it, it said. We walked. I had given many tours of this colony, survey teams, new arrivals, Commander Moss's liaison officer who had come down on day 4 with a data recorder and a nervous energy that gradually settled into something closer to fascination over the course of 3 hours. Every tour was different because every person was different. Arbiter 7 moved through the corridors the way deep water moves, unhurried, noticing everything. It stopped at the thermal conversion columns for a long time, running its own biological sensors over them, and did not speak. It crouched, which was a significant logistical event given its dimensions, to examine the pressure-bearing foundations of the main habitat ring. At the coolant junction where Owen had stopped on his first day and read the pressure gauge, Arbiter 7 stopped as well. "This channel runs above original specification," it said. 20% over, I said. "For 9 years, we monitor it every 6 hours." "You trusted your monitoring system over the specification limit." "We trusted the data over the assumption," I said. "There's a difference. The spec was written for different conditions. The data was written by the planet. We learned to read the planet." Arbiter 7 stood. The ceiling here was standard height. It stood slightly bent, which it had been doing since we entered the older corridors and had not mentioned. It said nothing to that. We kept walking. I had not planned to take it to the deepest point. It was not on the standard tour. But we reached the branch junction that led either toward the Hab rings or toward the original drill site at the 45-kilometer depth, and Arbiter 7 stopped at the junction, and its visual organs went toward the deeper branch, and it said, very quietly in its resonant way, "What is down there?" "The beginning," I said. "Show me." The original drill site was not maintained as a memorial. It was not cleaned up or marked for visitors. It was exactly what it had always been, a rough-cut chamber at the bottom of the first drill shaft, the walls scored and dark, the floor uneven where the original breach had happened, the edges of the old thermal events still readable in the rock if you knew how to read rock, which I did, which all of us who had been here long enough did. There were marks on the wall here too, older than anywhere else, done with drill bits and rock tools, uneven and urgent, from the days before we had time to be neat about anything. Arbiter 7 stood in the chamber and was very still. 7 people, I said. In 40 seconds, a thermal pocket breach that nobody had predicted because the geological surveys we had were incomplete. 7 people made a series of decisions in 40 seconds that redirected the event and sealed the breach. It cost them the ability to evacuate. Arbiter 7 was quiet. "The colony survived year 1 because of what happened in this room," I said. "Not easily, not completely, but it survived." We stood in the chamber for a while. Then Arbiter 7 said, "I have a question that is outside my formal mandate." "Go ahead." "What do you want?" it said. "Not the colony, not the legal position, not the reclassification filing. You, Sergeant Engineer Vazik, what do you want from this proceeding?" The question landed in the room and stayed there. I had been asked many things in 11 years, how to fix a cooling seal, whether the east tunnel was safe, what the yield on the conversion columns was, what the latest population count was, how to read a pressure gauge, what happened in year 1. Nobody had ever asked me what I wanted. I looked at the marks on the wall. The drill bit names from year 1, rough and fast and made by people who did not know if they were going to have a year 2. I stood with the question for a long time. "I want this place to count," I said. "Not just legally, not just as an anomaly in somebody's research report. I want what was built here, what was lost here, what was solved here, to mean something to the rest of the galaxy. Because right now we are either an unauthorized settlement or an interesting data point, and we have never been either of those things. We have been a place where people lived and worked and died, and figured out things that nobody else had figured out because nobody else had tried." Arbiter 7 was very still. "That is what I want," I said. "I want the galaxy to know that the things we built here are real, and I want those names on the wall to be on record somewhere that is not just this rock." The chamber hummed around us. Arbiter 7's visual organs held on the wall for a long moment. "I understand," it said. "Then let's go back up," I said. "I have a presentation to build." On the walk back, I did not talk. Neither did Arbiter 7. There was nothing to say that had not already been said in that chamber, and we both understood that, and that mutual understanding was its own kind of communication. The colony hummed around us. It always hummed at this depth. I was starting to understand, for the first time in 11 years, that the hum was not the planet pressing down on us. It was the planet carrying us. There was a difference. I was going to need to figure out what to do with that difference before I stood in front of the Galactic high seat. I had 48 hours. That was enough. It had to be. The Galactic high seat convened in orbit. Not on the surface, not underground. In orbit, aboard a combined assembly platform that the Council had brought in after Arbiter 7 filed the preliminary brief recommending formal review. 17 galactic bodies represented. The platform was large enough to dock 4 of Moss's frigates along one side without crowding. It hung above Kareth 9 like a question that the galaxy had finally gotten around to asking. I addressed them from 41 kilometers below. Carol had suggested I go up, appear in person, show good faith. She was not wrong about the optics, and she was not wrong that a physical presence in the chamber would carry a different weight than a screen. I stayed below. Not out of stubbornness, or not only out of stubbornness, but because I was going to ask them to understand what this place was, and asking them to understand it from a screen while I stood in it seemed more honest than standing in their clean orbital platform and talking about something I had left behind. I wore work clothes. Carol had laid out a formal colonial uniform. I appreciated it. I did not wear it. This was not a ceremony. This was a conversation I had been waiting to have for 11 years, and I was going to have it as myself. The connection established at 800 colony time. 17 windows on my screen, 17 bodies from 17 species arranged in the assembly platform's chamber, with Arbiter 7 seated at the high position in the center. Moss's image was in the lower left. He gave me a brief nod when I looked at his window. Sergeant Engineer Dara Vazik, Arbiter 7 said, "You have been granted full address before the Galactic High Seat Review Assembly. You may begin when ready." "Thank you," I said. I had notes. I did not look at them. "I want to start with a number," I said. "Not the one you've already seen in the brief. Not current population. Not colony age. A different number. The one that represents the difference between how many people arrived on Kareth 9 in year 0 and how many people are alive in this colony right now." I let that sit for a moment. I am not going to give you that number as a tragedy. I am going to give it to you as a context, because everything I am about to tell you about what we built here was built inside that number, inside that loss, inside the decision that was made repeatedly by the people who remained to keep building anyway. In the assembly chamber on the platform, 17 bodies were still. Kareth 9 was designated Class Omega by the Habitability Council because its surface and subsurface conditions exceed the survivability thresholds for all species in the Galactic Registry. That designation is accurate. The planet is genuinely hostile. The heat is real. The pressure is real. The magnetic instability is real. Every single thing the Council put in their designation report is a fact. I paused. We did not argue with those facts, we used them. I walked them through the thermal conversion columns. Not the overview that I gave to survey teams, not the simplified version, but the full engineering progression from Petra's Year 2 sketches on the back of a ration package to the current network that ran at yields that 2 of the 17 assembly members visibly reacted to when I stated them. I walked them through the pressure architecture. How the habitat rings were designed not to resist the geology, but to move with it, flex with it, using the planet's own compression as structural reinforcement rather than fighting it. How that design had been developed over 3 years of failure, incremental adjustment, and the particular education that comes from a planet that does not let you be wrong twice. I walked them through the magnetic barrier, the full history of it. How it had started as a side effect we noticed in Year 2, a consistent pattern in the interference that seemed almost directional. How it had taken a team of 4 people working in their rest hours for 8 months to develop a theory. How it had taken another year to test it, carefully, incrementally, using equipment that was never designed for this purpose and had to be adapted by hand. How the barrier in its current form was the result of 4 years of refinement and was now, as Commander Moss's scanner operators had discovered, effectively seamless. "You came here," I said, looking at Moss's window, "because the Council flagged an anomaly. You scanned and saw noise. The noise is ours. We built it. Which means that for 8 years any vessel passing through this system saw exactly what we designed them to see, a dead planet, a magnetic mess, nothing worth stopping for." I let that sit. I want to be clear about why we built it that way, not to hide from the galaxy specifically. We did not know the galaxy was looking. We built it because the people who live here learned early that the only dependable protection available to them was this planet itself, and the only way to use the planet as protection was to understand it completely. We understood it completely, so we used it. One of the assembly members, a delegate from the Hellion Compact, the same species as the survey coordinator Vess who had visited 11 years ago, and moved through our corridors like someone carrying a glass of water on their head, activated their address indicator. "Sergeant Engineer," it said, "you describe a colony that has been, by your own account, deliberately concealed from galactic systems. Authorization, environmental review, population registration, resource extraction licensing. None of these processes were followed. How do you address the legal dimension?" "With the resource code filing that has been in the record for 6 years, I said. "The legal position is in the brief Arbiter 7 submitted. I am not here to argue the legal position. Carol Dent, our colonial administrator, has argued the legal position, and I believe she has done it competently and thoroughly. I am here to argue something else." "Which is," the delegate said. "Value," I said. I pulled up the energy yield data. Current numbers. The conversion column output, averaged across the last 4 years, expressed in units that the assembly could cross-reference against standard energy infrastructure benchmarks. The number was large. "This is what the thermal columns produce," I said. "Monthly yield. This is not potential. This is actual, sustained, ongoing output from a network running continuously for 9 years. I watched the assembly members process it. Some of them cross-referenced immediately. Some just stared. "For context," I said, "that output is sufficient to supply emergency reserves for approximately 3 surrounding systems at standard consumption rates. And for the last 4 years, that is exactly what it has been doing." The assembly chamber went very quiet. "Through a sub-channel relay grid that we built and connected to the nearest coalition infrastructure junction," I said. "Without announcement, without asking for credit. Because the energy was there and it was being wasted, and there were systems nearby that periodically ran low and we had extra, and that is what you do with extra." I could see Moss's expression in his window. He was looking at someone off-screen. Someone who had presumably just confirmed what I was saying. He looked back at the camera. "You have been supplying power to 3 surrounding systems," he said. 4 years, I said. "Yes." "And you did not report this." "We were not registered," I said. "Reporting requires a registry. We did not have one. We sent the power anyway." The chamber was still processing this. I let it process. Then I said the thing I had figured out how to say in the 48 hours between the chamber at the 45-kilometer depth and this moment. "I want to tell you what Kareth 9 actually is," I said. "Not what the designation says, not what the scans read, what it actually is. It is the first Class Omega habitation zone in galactic history, and before you tell me that category does not exist, I am aware. I am asking you to create it." One of the assembly members shifted. Another activated an address indicator. I held up a hand briefly. "Let me finish," I said. No one interrupted. A Class Omega habitation zone is a planetary body rated as fundamentally incompatible with sapient habitation. where a sapient population has nevertheless established permanent, sustainable, self-sufficient habitation, and in doing so has developed engineering solutions, environmental integration techniques, and resource extraction methodologies that do not exist anywhere else in the galactic knowledge base. The reclassification does not change the planet's danger rating. It adds a second designation alongside it. It says, "This place is hostile and these people are here, and what they know because of it is worth knowing." I stopped for a moment. There are 11 years of engineering data in this colony. Thermal integration methods that your top institutions have not developed because they have never had reason to. Pressure architecture principles that solve problems that deep space construction has been wrestling with for decades. A magnetic barrier system that, and I say this not as a boast but as an engineering assessment, is the most sophisticated passive concealment array in galactic history because it was built by people who could not afford for it to fail. The Hellion Compact Delegates Address Indicator was still active. "I will take questions," I said, "but first." I looked at the screen, all 17 windows. In the original drill site at the 45-kilometer depth, there are names carved into the rock, rough ones, done in the first year by people who were not sure there would be a second year. Those names are not in any galactic record, not in any registry, not in any memorial database. They are just in the rock. I kept my voice level. It was not easy. Part of what I am asking for today is a formal record, for those names, for all the names from every year, not as casualties, not as a tragedy index, as a founding record. The names of the people who built the first Class Omega habitation zone in galactic history from the first day to the day you are hearing this. The chamber was very quiet. Arbiter 7's visual organs were oriented toward my screen. "That is what I am asking for," I said. "The reclassification, the registry, the record, everything else, the legal framework, the licensing, the formal integration into galactic systems, Carol has documented and I trust her to work through it. But those three things are mine to ask for, so I am asking." The deliberation took 4 hours. I sat in the signals room with Owen and Petra and Carol and Len, and about 60 other people who had no official reason to be there, and every human reason to be there. Someone had brought the good coffee, the actual ground kind that was saved for significant occasions, and it went around the room twice. Old Coop came and sat in the corner with his hard hat on his knee instead of over his face, which was, for Coop, the equivalent of standing at full attention. The vote came through on the same channel as the deliberation confirmation. 14-3 in favor. 3 abstentions on the energy supply licensing subclause, which Carol immediately flagged as something she could resolve in committee. The core reclassification passed. The registry creation passed. The formal record request passed. Kareth 9, Class Omega Habitation Zone, first of its kind, Galactic Registry entry effective immediately. I read the confirmation on the screen. I read it again. Then I printed it. Owen was watching me. Petra was watching me. The whole room was watching me, the way rooms watch a person who has just heard something that has been a long time coming. "Well," Petra said. I stood up. I walked to the break room. The corkboard was there. The original uninhabitable designation, 11 years old, pinned in the upper left corner next to the lunch rotation schedule, worn at the edges. Someone had drawn a small star on it at some point in blue marker. I had never asked who. I pinned the reclassification certificate next to it. Stood back. Looked at both of them side by side. Owen had followed me. He stood in the doorway. "How do you feel?" he said. I looked at the corkboard. I looked at the corridor beyond the break room door, where the lights hit the wall at an angle in the morning shift hours, and you could see, if you knew to look, the edge of the old section, where the corridor turned and the newer rock gave way to the older rock, where the wall carried its weight the way it always had. Like I owe some people an update, I said. I did not move toward the wall. I did not need to move toward it. The names knew already. The rock knew. 41 kilometers of built things and the steady hum of everything we had made from everything we had been given, and the weight of the planet pressing down the way it always pressed, the way it had pressed from the first day to this one, certain and constant and load-bearing in every sense of the word. I went to the coffee station, refilled my cup. The colony hummed. It always hummed at this depth. I had spent 11 years hearing it as pressure. I heard it differently now. I went back to work.